Welcome to the Unseen Wisdom. You see a headline, we try to dig a bit deeper.
Go beyond the surface noise.
Exactly. And today, that headline involves Ibrahim Traore. He's the leader of Burkina Faso's transitional government. And his pretty notable appearance at the Victory Day celebration in Moscow.
Right, Moscow. That definitely caught people's attention.
It really did. And it's a story that, it hints shifts far bigger than just one event, one leader.
Absolutely. It's about the undercurrents.
Yes. And for you listening, if you're one of those curious minds wanting to grasp what's really shaping the world, but, without getting totally bogged down.
Without needing a PhD in geopolitics just to follow the news.
Yeah, exactly. This is for you. We're going to try and connect some dots today. Explore what this seemingly small moment actually tells us about some pretty big global trends.
Sounds good.
And hey, if you find this kind of exploration insightful, if you appreciate us looking beyond just the headlines, please do hit that like button. Maybe leave a comment with your thoughts.
Yeah, we'd love to hear them.
And definitely subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive.
Okay, so Traore in Moscow. What's fascinating here, I think, isn't just that a leader from the Sahel was there at such a symbolic Russian event.
Right, it's the context.
It's the context, and it's what that presence suggests about, well, the evolving dynamics of global power, really.
Okay.
So our aim today, I suppose, is to look at Ibrahim Traore's visit not as some isolated thing, but maybe as an indicator.
An indicator of what specifically?
Of how African nations, or at least some of them, are navigating sovereignty, real sovereignty, in a world where you've got the established Western influence.
Still very much there.
Oh, absolutely. But also these resurgent powers like Russia, like China, vying for influence too.
So it's about the choices leaders are making in this crowded space.
Exactly. What might Traore's actions reveal about the strategies available, the paths being considered? That's what we want to unpack.
Okay, let's dive into that symbolic moment then. Victory Day in Moscow. It's always huge, steeped in history.
Immense historical weight.
Right. And this year, maybe more than ever, you could feel that weight globally. And they're among the usual big names you expect to see.
Like Xi Jinping, Lula da Silva.
Yeah, those kinds of figures. There was Ibrahim Traore. Now, look, Burkina Faso, maybe not the first country that springs to mind in that kind of lineup for everyone.
For most people, probably not, no.
But his attendance, it really has sparked a lot of chatter, a lot of analysis.
And it gets even more intriguing when you layer on the reports that Traore himself has been, well, under fire.
Right, you mentioned that the alleged assassination attempts, efforts to destabilize things back home in Burkina Faso.
Exactly. So you immediately start wondering, don't you?
About unseen hands.
Could there be external powers, perhaps, trying to maintain their, let's say, traditional influence by undermining leaders who seem to be charting a different course? Pushing back.
It's a question that hangs in the air, definitely.
Yeah.
Especially when you look at the history of intervention in the region.
And if we link this to that wider trend, nations seeking more diverse partnerships, Traore's presence, it just gains more significance, doesn't it?
Oh, so.
Well, he's a key figure in the Alliance of Sahel states. That's this regional bloc, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso.
Right. Formed fairly recently.
Yes, and it emerged really in response to some incredibly complex security challenges, development issues, the whole lot.
Things that weren't being solved by the old arrangements, arguably.
That's the perspective from within the alliance, certainly. But interestingly, if you look at a lot of the global news coverage, the narrative around this alliance is often, well, let's say negative, or framed as destabilizing, even a threat.
Okay, so a disconnect between how it's seen from the inside versus the outside.
A big one. From their viewpoint, these nations are actively pursuing genuine sovereignty. They're looking for collaborations beyond just the traditional Western sphere.
Which obviously challenges the status quo.
It absolutely does. And it raises that key question. What does the reaction to alliances like this tell us about the established global order? How willing is it, really, to accommodate different power dynamics, different choices?
It feels like, and maybe this is a stretch, but does it echo history? Could this visit, Traore, in Moscow, be like a modern Bandung moment?
That's a really interesting parallel. Tell me more what you mean by that.
Well, Bandung back in '55, right?
Yeah.
That was huge. Newly independent Asian and African nations coming together, asserting themselves, saying, we want a different world order, non-aligned.
A powerful statement against the bipolar Cold War world.
Exactly. So is Traore's presence in Moscow, alongside others perhaps, a similar kind of signal from what some call the global majority, a statement about their values, their desire for change, for a reevaluation in how the world works.
I think that parallel holds a lot of water, actually. It captures that sense of asserting agency. The presence of leaders like Traore in Moscow, it definitely highlights this noticeable shift away from solely Western-centric alignments.
And
Towards a more multipolar approach, perhaps. We've seen quite clearly the growing engagement of both China and Russia across Africa.
offering different partnership models, different terms sometimes.
Different models, yeah. Compared to the traditional Western ones, which often came with, let's say, more strings attached or historical baggage.
Right.
And if you think back, say, 10, maybe 15 years ago, would African nations have felt they had the same room to maneuver? The confidence to potentially deviate from established Western ties?
Probably less so. The options seemed fewer, maybe the perceived risks higher.
That's my sense, too. It seems the engagement with countries like China and Russia has, at least for some leaders, provided a kind of strategic depth.
Meaning what? Like more options, more leverage.
More options. Maybe a feeling that they aren't entirely dependent on one bloc. It might give them the confidence or perhaps the political space to explore alternative paths, to say no sometimes.
Which inevitably brings us back to that idea of external intervention.
Yeah.
This narrative just keeps popping up.
It's persistent because, well, many argue the evidence is there. The idea that powerful nations are actively working, sometimes subtly, sometimes not so subtly, to maintain their spheres of influence in Africa.
And Libya is often the go-to example, isn't it?
It really is. The NATO intervention, led primarily by the US and key European allies, whatever the intention stated at the time, the result was prolonged chaos, division, instability.
A failed state, essentially.
Many would call it that. And it's often cited as Exhibit A for how external actions can have devastating long-term negative consequences, even if framed as humanitarian or pro-democracy.
So the argument is this wasn't just a one-off mistake, but potentially part of a pattern, kind of playbook.
That's the troubling question some analysts raise. Is there a broader strategy, something like divide and rule, aimed at preventing the consolidation of real, genuine sovereignty in regions perceived as strategically important?
Keeping countries manageable, perhaps dependent.
Preventing the emergence of strong, independent regional blocs or leaders who might challenge established interests. It echoes, historical colonial tactics. Think of British policy in India, for instance, exploiting divisions to maintain control.
So history casting a long shadow.
A very long shadow. And the suspicion is that these tactics haven't entirely disappeared. They've just adapted for the neocolonial era.
Okay, so given all this complex web of influence, history, and shifting power, what can other leaders, maybe other presidents in similar situations, learn from Traore's approach? Or at least what observations can be made?
Well, one key observation is his apparent willingness to engage openly with non-Western powers, like Russia, in this very visible way.
Despite the potential backlash from traditional Western partners.
Exactly. That suggests a strategy, perhaps, of diversifying international relationships quite deliberately, not putting all eggs in one basket.
And the thinking there would be?
It could be seen as a way to strengthen national sovereignty, to create options, maybe even gain a bit of leverage or a buffer against undue external influence or pressure from one side.
Playing the field, so to speak, but for national gain.
You could frame it that way. It also highlights, I think, the critical importance for leaders today to be really aware of and actively push back against these potential neocolonial influences or pressures.
To recognize the game, as it were.
To recognize the game. And crucially, this kind of independent stance, it seems much more viable when there's strong popular support at home.
Ah, the domestic foundation.
Yes. The apparent level of popular backing for these movements for change, for greater sovereignty in places like Burkina Faso and neighboring countries, that seems absolutely vital. It gives leaders like Traore a mandate, a foundation that perhaps makes external pressure less effective.
So it's not just the leader, it's the movement behind them.
It has to be, doesn't it, for it to be sustainable. Otherwise, it's just one person against powerful forces.
That makes sense. It really feels like, for much of Africa, true uncompromised sovereignty has been this goal, this aspiration, for centuries, really, since the colonial era ended formally, but perhaps not economically or politically.
A long, ongoing struggle. Decades of it.
So could this moment, symbolized by things like Traore's actions, the Sahel Alliance, could this actually represent a potential turning point, a genuine breakout moment, as some are suggesting?
It's certainly a moment of significant flux and assertion. Whether it's the breakout moment, history will tell. But the potential is there.
The potential for what, exactly?
Well, the potential for the actions we're seeing in the Sahel to inspire other African nations, to perhaps reevaluate their own relationships with global powers.
To question dependencies.
To question dependencies, maybe to challenge leaders or systems seen as obstacles to genuine independence, or too closely tied to external interests rather than national ones.
Oh, a potential ripple effect across the continent.
That's the hope, I think, among those pushing for this change, that it could catalyze a broader shift.
But let's be realistic, too. Achieving that kind of lasting sovereignty, it's not just about standing up to external powers, is it?
Oh, absolutely not. That's only half the battle, maybe less. It also requires confronting and overcoming significant internal challenges.
Like what?
Like potentially internal divisions, or, as some analyses suggest, misleaders, figures within the system who might, consciously or unconsciously, serve external agendas rather than the people's interests.
Entrenched elites, maybe, who benefit from the status quo.
That's often a major factor. Corruption, weak institutions, these can all be exploited. So internal unity, a clear national vision, good governance, these are paramount.
And this is where those grassroots movements come back in.
Critically, civil society, trade unions, youth movements, popular organizations, they play a huge role, driving change, holding leaders accountable, ensuring that sovereignty isn't just a top-level political game, but actually benefits the population.
Making sure the breakout actually leads somewhere better for ordinary people.
Exactly. That's the ultimate test, isn't it?
Okay, so let's try and synthesize this a bit. Pull the threads together. Ibrahim Traore's presence in Moscow. It's clearly way more than just a photo op or line in a news report.
Far more. It's loaded with symbolism.
It acts as this powerful symbol of, well, several things at once. Evolving global alliances, definitely. African nations pushing harder for genuine sovereignty.
And that ongoing struggle, that navigation against external interference or perceived interference.
Right. And while opinions on his actions, his alliances, they might differ wildly.
And they do. Very controversial in some quarters.
No doubt. But they undeniably offer food for thought, potential insights, maybe even lessons, for other leaders trying to find their way in this increasingly multipolar world.
It's a case study in real time, really.
And for you, listening in, seeking that deeper understanding beyond the quick headlines. We hope this exploration, this deep dive, has given you some valuable context, helped connect some of those dots.
Indeed. And it really leaves us with a pretty significant question to mull over, doesn't it? What are the long-term implications of all this? These shifting alliances, this determined push for greater sovereignty from nations in the global south. What does it mean for the future shape of global power? For true independence.
Not just in Africa, but globally.
Globally. It's a dynamic, messy, fascinating landscape unfolding right now. And, keeping a critical eye on these trends is just essential if you want to understand the forces genuinely shaping our world.
A really important point to end on. There are no easy answers here.
Definitely not.
Well, thank you for joining us on The Unseen Wisdom. If you found this deep dive into Ibrahim Traore's Moscow visit and what it might signify insightful, please do take a second to like, comment, maybe share your own perspective.
We genuinely appreciate the engagement.
And hit subscribe so you catch our next exploration. We'll be back soon, digging into more of the unseen forces shaping our world.